Hello and welcome to Psyched, the show where we explore psychedelics through social, economic, and political perspectives.
Now we have our last speaker of the day. Kaitlin Koga is the Chief of Staff of the Bail Project, where she coordinates the strategic, human capital, and scaling priorities of the organization. Kaitlin brings a decade of experience working on social justice issues, including over 70 years of direct service work with low-income youth and incarcerated individuals, as well as managing over a dozen impact-focused consulting projects with nonprofits and government organizations in the US and abroad. Prior to TBP, Kaitlin led strategy at a prison and education nonprofit, served as a college counselor in Boston Public Schools, developed criminal justice reform policy at the White House, and worked as an associate consultant at a nonprofit human capital management firm. Kaitlin has a bachelor's in history and literature from Harvard College and an MBA from the Yale School of Management. Kaitlin, thank you so much for taking the time to come on, and welcome to Psych.
Amazing. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, you're good.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that introduction. And thanks, Daniel, for that amazing meditation exercise. I feel so grounded at this moment. Give me a second while I get my screen set up. All right. Well, thank you so much to the Psych 2020 team for having me here today. I'm here to talk about the Bail Project, but first I want to start with a story. And that story is, about 2 years ago, I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I met a young Black woman who we will call Jolie. Jolie was a single mother who had fallen on hard times and was living out of her car with her 2 young children. She was just on the verge of turning her life around completely. She had found a good, stable job that she was excited about. She literally had the keys to an apartment and was ready to move out and end her time in homelessness with her family. And she was ready to start this new life when she was arrested. An officer arrested her for, quote unquote, driving under the influence after he detected the smell of marijuana around her parked car, which at the time was her home. And overnight, she lost everything. She lost her jobs, she lost her kid, and she lost her new apartment that she had was just about ready to move into. And because she could not afford her bail, which was less than $2,000, she was forced to sit in jail until her court date. One of the staff at the Bail Project, the organization I work at, was able to meet Jolie in jail. They interviewed her, found that she was eligible for our services, and bailed her out. They then met with her on the outside and supported her in the process of trying to rebuild, her life, get custody back of her kids, get a new job, because the one that she had is unfortunately no longer available, and find a new place to live and to call home. When I met her a few weeks later, she teared up with gratitude for being able to be reunited with her family and to be back on her path. But it struck me as horrific. It really horrified me that had we not been able to intervene, this young mother, though literally presumed innocent under the law, could have sat in jail for days or weeks, potentially losing everything she had worked so hard to rebuild, simply because she could not afford her bail. Jolie's experience is not an outlier. In fact, it is a shocking reality that 2.5 million people across the country are held in jail simply because they cannot afford their bail. It's worth zooming out to understand a little bit more about how this 2-tiered system of justice came to be. Many people now understand that the United States has a crisis of mass incarceration. We incarcerate more people than any other country in the world, both in terms of absolute numbers and per capita. So you can see on the left hand of this slide, just one comparison of our incarceration rates versus other founding NATO members and their rates of incarceration. It's also important to note that the world did not always look this way. The United States did not always look this way. If you look at the graph on the right, you can see how these changes happened over time. And most notably, the policy changes that really drove mass incarceration included the war on drugs in the 1970s and tough on crime policies that followed after the war on drugs well into the 1990s. These were policies that targeted low-income and Black and Brown communities and allowed police to arrest people in record numbers. The result was that by 2001, a Black man living in America had a 1 in 3 chance of being incarcerated in their lifetime. Sit with that statistic for a second. If you are a Black man in this country born in 2001, you had a 1 in 3 chance of being incarcerated. And we know that the piece that's really driving a lot of this incarceration is policing, right? Which is having its own moment of reckoning right now. This is really what drove people to get arrested and start the funnel into mass incarceration. But really, it's worth thinking about bail as a really key lever in that process, because bail is really what happens after someone gets arrested, and the key lever that determines what happens to the person who is accused. There's really 2 paths. If someone can afford their bail, they get to go home that day, that night, whenever their bail is paid. They get to go home to their community until their court date. They're able to fight their case from a place of freedom. And quite often they have really different outcomes in the legal system. If they cannot pay their bail, they sit in jail for days, weeks, months, and yes, sometimes even years, even though they are legally presumed innocent under the law. In that time, like Jolie, their life on the outside can fall apart as they lose their job, their relationships, their children, sometimes their immigration status. And because jail is profoundly dehumanizing, they may also experience violence in jail. We know that 40% of jail suicides and homicides occur within the first week of someone being there. To avoid these consequences, of course, many people will plead guilty regardless of whether they are actually innocent, in order to be safe and in order to get home to their families. Thus, bail is not only this 2-tiered system of justice preying on poor Black and Brown communities, it has actually become the oil in the machine that keeps mass incarceration functioning. As people plead out, their cases no longer have to be settled in court, enabling the now overloaded court dockets as police funnel more and more people into the system to just pass them through seamlessly. In fact, pretrial detention, that is, people being booked in jail before their day in court, again, presumed innocent under the law, has accounted for nearly 100% of the growth in jails over the last 20 years. So really, bail is a key driver of mass incarceration and a key consequence of enabling the system that, the really overextended police system, which everyone is talking about now, has enabled. So to combat that problem, we launched the Bail Project in 2018. And the Bail Project is really about taking a decarceration strategy of bailing out people and reuniting families and restoring the presumption of innocence across the country to high-need jurisdictions. We are raising funds for a national revolving bail fund and posting people's bail on an unprecedented scale. And just to talk about that fund for a second, because it really is a different model of philanthropy in the world. What happens when someone returns to court is that actually we get the money back. We get a refund for the bail, which means that when we are successful in posting bail and supporting someone to come to court, that money comes back to us and actually can be recycled and used to bail out 2 or 3 more times per year, which really maximizes, the impact of the work that we're able to do. As we learn more, as we're expanding and going to newer jurisdictions, we're really developing a blueprint for what an effective and humane pretrial system could look like. And really, we have a 2-pronged strategy to our work, which is first, we We meet people in jail and we provide immediate relief to those who are stuck because they don't have bail money. You know, we really see this problem as a humanitarian crisis, and we're really trying to provide rapid response to as many people as possible. We pay bail for folks, and then we support them through the duration of their case, which looks like providing effective court reminders, voluntary referrals to social service agencies if someone doesn't have housing or doesn't have a job, and pretrial support such as transportation assistance. So we know that the reason that people don't come to court is not because they're willfully trying to disobey the law or, you know, don't want to see their case settled. Really, it's the barriers of life, you know, having kids and that getting in the way, or having an unreliable transportation and not being able to get there on time. So we try to make it as easy as possible for people to get to court and model really what a justice system should look like on that front. We call that model community release with support, and really our goal is to share what we're learning on the ground and get every jurisdiction across the United States to embrace this model. We're also collecting data and telling human stories on a national front to talk about the impacts of pretrial detention, to better inform policymakers, local elected officials, and advocates in order to inspire reform and ensure long-term systemic change. We're actively trying to demonstrate that there is a viable alternative to our cash bail system, that it doesn't have to be this way, and that we're proving that model every day through our work. Some of our early results is that in the 2.5 years since we've launched, we've paid over 13,000 bails on behalf of low-income community members, and we're in about 20 sites across the country. These sites are really designed as a portfolio approach because we're really trying to understand what bail reform looks like everywhere, right? We know that what happens in New York City, which is where our model first started, is not going to be the same as what happens in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Spokane, Washington, or Compton, California, or Detroit, Michigan, which are all some of the cities that we're in. So we're really trying to build a diverse set of locations that serve very different populations of people to show that our model can work everywhere and that really freedom can be the norm. Most importantly, we're showing through our data that cash bail is really not what gets people to come to court. You know, it's this model of support. So nationally, we've seen our clients return to over 90% of their court dates, showing that even with zero money on the line, they are showing up and seeing their cases through. And additionally, going back to that lever, right? That lever that prosecutors and judges have to keep people in the system, to keep people to plead guilty and suffer collateral consequences of having a record for the rest of their life. We're finding that when people don't have that incentive to plead guilty, when they're able to fight their cases from a place of freedom and from home, we're actually seeing dismissal rates of up to 30 to 50% in jurisdictions, underlying that there was never a reason for them to be arrested or suffer any time in jail at all. But I want to really emphasize and underscore a point here, which is that, you know, bail funds are not the answer to systemic injustice. We know that this is a lifeline that we're providing in the moment, but really our intervention is meant to be a critical tool to get those locked in jail cells out now, while providing the data, advocacy, and human stories that are going to move reform efforts forward in the long term. Really, our long-term goal is to put ourselves out of business, and we genuinely mean that. We want to close jurisdictions down across the country because bail reform has taken place and because jurisdictions have adopted our model of community release with support, really erring on the side of freedom for people who are presumed innocent. I want to end my remarks today by talking about the staff of the Bail Project, who are really the heart and soul of what we do. These are staff that we call bail disruptors, and they are local leaders in their community who are working every day to get people free. They are change makers, they're activists, they're often people who have been directly impacted by these systems themselves, having either experienced jail or having had bail set, or have seen their families go through this process. And I want to end with their voices and for you to be able to hear their words. I'm going to stop sharing for a second just to make sure my audio is set up. And I'm going to end with this video.
For so long, our country has told us that your constitutional right is that you're innocent before proven guilty.
I was raised believing that the justice system was blind, that it was equal for everybody, and it's not.
I think the Bell Project gives people hope because we are able to do tangible things. We're able to get people out of jail, stop that cycle of you get incarcerated and then your whole life falls apart.
The Bail Project sort of works on two levels. One is the individual level, in that we impact people's lives on a daily basis by getting them out of jail. And then on the other level, we work to create systemic policy change.
The fact that 500,000 people every single night go to sleep in a jail cell who haven't been convicted of any crime is one of our national shames.
Making sure that people have access to continue to go to work, take care of their families, and continue their lives until their date of adjudication.
I'm excited to be part of a project that presumes innocence and allows you to fight for your case on the outside instead of the inside, where the only thing you could do to get out of jail is to say you're guilty.
So the Bail Project is a national organization that works to end mass incarceration by disrupting the cash bail system.
The mission of the Bail Project is to make sure that everyone is innocent until proven guilty, that we are free and that our freedom should be free.
After 8.5 months of sitting in jail, I decided to take a plea bargain for time served just so I can go home. When I found out about the Bail Project, I just remember wishing that I had somebody like that in my corner while I was going through that.
You can get arrested for being homeless, you can get arrested for being poor, you can get arrested for being brown, for being black, for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you can have bail set for any of those reasons too.
If a bond is $1,000, people can't afford it. If a bond's $5,000, people can't afford it. People are sitting in jail not because of the alleged crime that they've committed, but because they are poor.
Support without judgments and support without any strings attached to it, and maintaining a humanity. We're here to provide what you need. We're not going to tell you what you need. You tell us what you need, and then we'll just do it.
We are supporting our clients by paying their bills and supporting them throughout their case.
The Bail Project really aligns well with a lot of the work that I'm doing and that so many other people in my community are doing as well.
I think about compassion, resilience, and we're constantly fighting against oppression.
We believe in the vehicle of liberation for all people. This system has been so racist for so long, and we have an opportunity to actually create equity.
My vision of justice would be equity in all realms of society for all people.
That regardless of your skin or your culture or your background, that you should be able to have a voice and to be able to fight your case and be able to have the same access as anyone with money.
So watch out, America. Freedom is about to be free.
Awesome. So with that, I'm really happy to open up to any questions. And thanks again, Psych 2020 for sponsoring the Bail Project and supporting our work.
Kaitlin, thank you so much. Loved it. It was really, really moving. And you've talked to me a little bit about your work, but there was a lot more that I learned through that. So thank you. I just want to start off with a question. You mentioned the process of actually closing down, bail, and making sure that that's something that just doesn't even need to be a prerequisite for the system. What does that process look like? What does it actually look to go and have a jurisdiction or a county say, like, we're no longer going to be doing bail?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I think it starts with two pieces, right? And it's really the piece of our project that's focused on data and human stories. So one is that people need to understand bail, right? Like, laws get changed, policy gets passed, not just because of a few people sitting at the top deciding what happens, but because the public gets involved and really feels like this is an issue that they care about. And you can see that in the streets of the United States and around the world right now, right? Where people are really saying, we need to change these systems that are racist, that are hurting people. And so we're really trying to tell those stories and share with the public what's happening and get people activated so that they're pushing people for change. And then we're also collecting data, right? We're showing that the system doesn't even work the way that it's meant to. We have better court appearance rates than a lot of jurisdictions do, just the way that they're designed. And so really showing governments and policymakers that there is a model for how to operate with freedom and getting those laws changed. It's also about practice, right? Judges, prosecutors, folks in the system have a lot of discretionary power. And when they are also persuaded that this is not the way, it's getting them to enact and use the power that they have to really err on the side of freedom. So it's persuading a lot of people. And then we're also hopeful that if bail reform laws get passed, that we can share some blueprints for what we're learning, right? So if we know that transportation is a problem, most people can't get to court who are low income, let's divest from jails and not spend all that money on building more jails and infrastructure to house people, but rather, invest in transportation systems, invest in housing solutions, invest in job training, because this is what people really need. It's not to be sitting in a jail cell at enormous cost to taxpayers.
Mm-hmm. And so there's so many folks. I think one of the folks in the video said 500,000 people a night going to sleep even when they're not convicted of a crime. Is there any research that's been done on the mental health effects of something like that, of having to sit in a jail cell without being convicted? Any research on possible trauma that might be caused? Maybe not, but just to align with some of the things being talked about at the conference. Was just curious if the data exists.
Yeah, there's a huge body of research on the trauma of jails, on what people experience. And, I think the number that I shared earlier was that 40% of violence that happens in jails, so when people are harmed or murdered or commit suicide, happens within the first week. So the harm and the mental health effects are immediate. But of course, if people are sitting in jail for much longer, you can imagine how that reverberates. And there's also, we could even look at what's happening right now with COVID around the country, right? All of us feel a bit on edge to be outside, to be in public. There's just this feeling of being worried about your safety. And imagine if you had to sit in a jail cell with 10 or 15 or 20 other people where no social distancing is possible, where there's circulated air, where the surfaces aren't clean. Like, that's an incredibly stressful and traumatic situation. On any day, but the types of things that are happening in our country now around COVID just amplify that. So most definitely, just looking at our jails across the country, you can see the mental health crisis that it inspires. And certainly there's a lot of literature on the effects of jails and prisons on mental health.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And another thing that you brought up was the effect on families. How are families able to interact with an individual who might be under bail? Can a child not even go and see their family? Or are they able to pop in only for a certain period of time? What does that relationship look like?
Yeah, it's very jurisdiction specific. So every jail and every prison has their own policies on visitation. But, I can speak to my experience, visiting folks in the Massachusetts system when I was working college education there. And that was that you would have to register a form, you'd have to wait, sometimes hours in a waiting room to get in. You'd have to go through a metal detector, and then at most you'd have about 45 minutes to an hour with someone. And this is also noting that, in my case, the facility that I was visiting was an hour and a half away from where I lived. And so the journey and the ability for people to visit their loved ones can be very, very much hampered by both geographic distance and then the policies that are set in place. So it can be very hard to be in contact with folks. Of course, the other piece of that is there are some jails that have phones or video conferencing, but oftentimes those things are expensive, and there are a lot of private industries that charge really exorbitant amounts for you to be able to talk to your loved one. So if you're thinking again about people who are living in poverty who can't afford their bail, they also probably can't afford more than a 10-minute phone call because it can be so expensive based on the systems that folks are using. So yeah, the alienation is really real, and the barriers for families to be able to be with their loved one again when they're presumed innocent can be enormous.
Mm-hmm. And so young children who maybe don't have the abilities to even go visit that site, what happens? How does communication work? Does a police officer come and interact with a small child, or is there a phone call made? What actually happens?
Yeah, I mean, if someone is arrested and they're not able to be, reunited with their children, and there's no other guardian, then, the case could get picked up by a number of different welfare agencies that have to find out what to do with the child. And that may be putting the child in temporary custody with, Child Protective Services or other agencies in the area, finding other foster parents. Sometimes they're able to get in contact with another relative to place children within this care, but that presumes, you know, that they can get the information and coordinate all of that work. So if there is no other guardian, then yes, children are separated from their parents and sometimes separated from their families and put into, you know, whatever situation the agency can facilitate.
Mm. You know, during this conference, we're screening 13th, Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson. I was wondering, you know, what are the other really large stories, documentaries, you know, journalism that needs to be done to shine light on this issue? What are some things that you would love to see media putting out there to be able to educate people more?
Yeah, you know, I think people are starting to understand the scope of what mass incarceration looks like, and that's so important. So, you know, 13th is a great example, and books like Just Mercy or The New Jim Crow are just wonderful kind of primers on getting a sense of the scope of the system. On the pretrial side, some of the areas that we're trying to eliminate and start to do more storytelling around are really about some of the harmful alternatives to incarceration that are being pushed onto consciousness. So a lot of people will say, okay, but cash bail, that's bad, but you know, we don't want to have people in jails, but what if we put everyone on electronic monitors? You know, maybe that is a more humane way of dealing with pretrial, and that solution is really being pushed in a lot of jurisdictions. They're saying, okay, we'll get rid of cash bail, but we're going to put everyone on electronic monitors, and, you know, don't worry, you don't have anything to worry about as long as you're, you know, a good person. But of course, that is a level of surveillance into people's lives that it should be unacceptable on the level of government, particularly for folks who, again, are over policed, right? People who don't really want the government surveilling all of the low income and Black and brown communities and creating this really, again, a two-tiered system of justice. The other part about that is that people offer it as a more humane solution than jail, but they oftentimes have all of these stipulations around electronic monitoring. So for example, you know, if you think about an electronic monitor, that's basically an ankle monitor bracelet that gets strapped to your ankle as something like your cell phone. Well, if you ever get out of range and the police can't pick up a signal, that gives them an excuse to come to your house, to come to where you are, to investigate, to potentially arrest you for violating the terms of the electronic monitor. If your electronic monitor dies because you didn't plug it in, much like your cell phone, you didn't plug it in, you literally can be arrested for violating the terms. And so this is really, you know, another form of control and surveillance, not really a form of freedom. And of course is very stigmatizing when you see it in public. So we're really trying to tell those stories too, right? On the pretrial side, if we're getting rid of cash bail, which people are starting to line on that we should, let's not invest in an expensive new system of government surveillance and control. Let's actually put resources in communities, and let's actually focus on building up communities and building up resources in communities to support people.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Kaitlin, I think we're headed towards the end of our time, but thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. Folks, if you have not donated yet, please do so, especially if you didn't donate to Psych 2020 for the conference. Please take that $15, put it towards the Bail Project. Thank you so much, Kaitlin, for coming on. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be here.
Be well.